Hello everyone and welcome back. When Nvidia released their new Ampere-based RTX 3000 series of cards, Team Green promised staggering performance uplift over the 2000 series and, most importantly, a cheaper pricing across the range. Yeah, we all know what happened with that, but that's a story for another time. Fast forward to nearly 3 years later and we are finally looking at the RTX 3060. Nvidia targeted this card towards the 1080p gamer, so why not take a closer look if buying one of these finally makes sense. At the time of recording this video, used 3060s can be typically found selling for around £230 or $275 and there is plenty to choose from. My card was a really clean example of Gigabyte's gaming OC model. RTX 3060 originally released in January 2021 for $329. Manufactured on Samsung's 8nm process, 3060 came with 3584 CUDA cores and 28 RT cores. GPU was clocked at 1320 MHz, but under load, I saw it boosting up to nearly 2 GHz. RTX 3060 came with 12GB of GDDR6 memory connected via 192-bit memory bus, and the card operates a relatively modest 170W TDP. It's worth mentioning Nvidia re-released this card in September 2022. This newer 3060 came with just 8GB of memory and a slightly narrower 128-bit memory bus, however, they kept the same MSRP of $329. How noble of you, Nvidia. As always, we start by running synthetic benchmarks. 3060 scored 9,242 points in 3D Mark TimeSpy, which makes it 10% faster than 5600 XT and nearly 100% faster than the old entry-level GTX 1060. RTX 3060 is around 13% slower than the legendary 1080 Ti and 82% slower when compared to RTX 3080. The result of Firestrike Extreme puts 3060 slightly behind RX 5600 XT, which is surprising considering the price difference of the two. 1080 Ti gained additional lead and now 36% faster, the RTX 3080 is 60% faster. Blender's Classroom GPU render took 57 seconds to complete. 5600 XT was considerably slower in this test, taking additional 41 seconds. RTX 3060 officially kicks off first ray traced benchmark with Port Royal, and the score was 5,238 points. Heaven benchmark with ultra quality and extreme tessellation next. 3060 scored 4,124 points, which is 26% faster over the 5600 XT. 1080 Ti led by 35% more, and the RTX 3080 was faster by 81%. Let's take GPU power draw into consideration. RTX 3060 is a modern card, and with 170 watts on average it pulled under load, it scored well in this category. With 24.6 points for every watt it consumed in Heaven benchmark, it scored worse than 5600 XT, which was more efficient, but only by a hair. Happy to see the 1080 Ti is not far behind and still hanging in there. When looking at the 3060's MSRP, in theory, it offered the best value out of the all graphics cards I have ever tested so far, but in reality, 3060 sold well in excess of $500, which made it very bad value product. The last and perhaps the most important aspect we need to consider is the second-hand value. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, 3060s can be usually purchased for around $275 or £230. Looking at the graph then, with mere 14.8 points in Heaven benchmark for every dollar spent, 3060 sits nearly at the bottom. This makes the 5600 XT seem like a much better value, and not to mention the older Polaris or even Nvidia's Pascal based cards. Let me know what your thoughts are so far in the comments down below. And as important as synthetic benchmarks are, let's look at some games next. All games I've tested are running at 1080p, and we start with the all-time favourite, Witcher 3. Making use of those 28 RT cores found in 3060, I've dialed in the RT preset. You have to admit, nighttime Oxenford looks stunning. Ray tracing truly adds the next-gen feel. There is, however, a price to pay for all that eye candy, and even though game ran smoothly, I saw just 54 FPS on average and 1% lows were at 39. What is also worth pointing out is the staggering amount of VRAM used by the game engine. These settings are happy to use 8GB at times. Dropping down to Ultra preset with DLSS on quality, I saw a big uplift to 100 FPS on average with 1% lows at 64. Which setting do you guys prefer? Sadly, with no official DLSS support in Starfield, I had to use medium preset and stick with FSR2. This means the render scale is at 50% and instantly makes you doubt, was this game really released less than 2 months ago? Anyway, strolling around New Atlantis, RTX 3060 pushed 55 FPS on average with 1% lows at 38. Seems as I'm not quite done with Starfield, can we just appreciate how much better Days Gone looks and runs? Oh, did I also mention it's actually been ported from a console? Rant over. Days Gone with very high preset runs flawlessly on the RTX 3060 and I saw 105 FPS on average and 1% lows at 58. For a bit of comparison, when I tested 1080 Ti a few weeks back, it pushed 10 FPS more on average, using the same settings of course. Next game tested was Cyberpunk 2077. I've used medium ray tracing preset and DLSS on quality. Doing my usual run from the outskirts of Night City and all the way up to Liz's Bar, and I saw very playable 59 FPS on average, with 1% lows at 45. However, when action picks up, 3060 couldn't quite keep up, suggesting I should really drop a setting by a notch. Here is a game you don't see tested often. Microsoft Flight Sim offers unique experiences around the globe and I highly recommend trying it. I've used DirectX 11 and high-end preset along with DLSS on quality. Whilst casually exploring Big Apple, 3060 pushed 80 FPS on average and 1% lows were sitting at 56. Every time I open Rockstar Launcher, I remind myself that we are all still patiently awaiting the much needed arrival of GTA 6. How much longer do you think? Red Dead Redemption 2 next. I've cranked up the details up to 11, more specifically, the slider sits on the first tick of Favor Quality, which puts most things to Ultra, and the DLSS was on quality. Whilst mindlessly riding Payco through St. Denis, RTX 3060 managed to push 60 FPS on average and 1% lows were at 40. Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition was the first AAA title with support for ray-traced global illumination and to this date still offers some of the most impressive graphics to be seen in a video game. With high settings all round, the game ran amazingly well on the RTX 3060 and I saw 142 FPS on average with 1% lows at 84. Another rather VRAM hungry game was FarCry 6. With ultra settings and HD textures enabled, I saw 72 FPS on average and the game engine used nearly 7GB of memory. However, with 12GB on board, this was no problem for the 3060. And the last game tested was Forza Horizon 5. This time I went with an extreme preset which also enables ray tracing. RTX 3060 managed to push 82 FPS on average and landed very nice 1% lows at 69.9. Nice. Once again, GPU memory usage spiked to nearly 7.2GB. And there you have it folks.
Guten Tag, Gamescom!
The RTX 3060 in its full glory. So, what is up with this once unaffordable mid-range GPU? Is it too little too late? Let's go over the good stuff first. The 12GB VRAM buffer is really nice to have, and perhaps it's the best feature of the 3060. Nvidia was not wrong recommending the 3060 towards the premium 1080p gaming. Most games tested today used eye-pleasing details and had no trouble achieving 60 FPS on average, some even with ray tracing enabled. On the other hand, I think RTX 3060 is simply too expensive. It looks much better in isolation, and as soon as you look at other 3000 series cards such as the 3060 Ti, which is only marginally more expensive but comes with 35% more CUDA cores, why would you even consider it? Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad product, but it needs to be cheaper. And I'm not even going to mention the crippled 8GB revision. This only applies to the original 12GB model of the 3060. The all-new RTX 4060 is out there, and while it is about 10% faster, it's hardly what I would call an upgrade, mostly relying on the upscaling technologies. Then, there's also AMD with their considerably cheaper 5700 XT or similarly priced 6600 XT, which I'm going to test next. Let's also not forget about Intel and their Arc A750 or 770, which are aging like fine wine. With all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this review. Have you ever owned a 3060? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope to see you all in the next one.